It was a chilly autumn morning, and the streets of the small town buzzed with the usual chaos. People hurried past each other, clutching coffee cups and glancing at their watches. Among them was a young woman named Karoline Leavitt, fresh out of college and eager to make her mark on the world. With a degree in social work tucked under her belt, she carried big dreams of helping others. But today, as she walked down the busy sidewalk, something unusual caught her attention. Sitting on the curb near a bus stop was a man wrapped in a worn-out jacket. His face was weathered, lined with stories of hardship, and his eyes held a quiet sadness. Beside him lay a cardboard sign that read, "Homeless veteran, anything helps." The words hit Karoline like a punch to the gut. She had heard about veteran homelessness before, how many who served their country ended up struggling once they returned home. But seeing it right in front of her felt different. It was personal now. Karoline slowed her pace and stopped a few feet away. Most people passed by without even looking, their minds preoccupied with their own lives. Some tossed loose change into the cup beside him, but no one stopped to talk. For a moment, Karoline hesitated too. What could she possibly say? Would he even want to speak to her? But then she remembered why she chose this path in life: to help those who needed it most. Taking a deep breath, she stepped closer. "Hi," she said softly, crouching down so she wasn't towering over him. Her voice was gentle, almost hesitant. The man looked up, clearly surprised. He hadn't expected anyone to stop, let alone speak to him. After a brief pause, he nodded slightly. "Hey," he replied, his tone gruff but not unkind. Karoline smiled warmly. "I'm Karoline. Do you mind if I sit here for a bit?" The man shrugged, shifting slightly to give her space. "Sure, go ahead. I'm James," he added after a moment. As Karoline settled onto the ground, she noticed how thin his jacket was. It didn't look like it would offer much protection against the biting wind. She pulled her scarf tighter around her neck, feeling a pang of guilt for being so warmly dressed while he seemed to have so little. Still, she didn't rush into offering solutions or asking intrusive questions. Instead, she started with something simple. "So, James, what branch did you serve in?" she asked, gesturing toward the faded Marine Corps emblem embroidered on his jacket. His expression softened just a fraction. "Marines," he said, his voice tinged with pride despite everything. "2 tours overseas." "That's incredible," Karoline said sincerely. "Thank you for your service." James gave a small nod, though there was a shadow behind his eyes. Karoline sensed there was more to his story, but she didn't push. Instead, she kept the conversation light, asking about his favorite memories from his time in the military. Slowly, James began opening up. He spoke about the camaraderie, the sense of purpose, and the bonds he formed with his fellow soldiers. There was a spark in his voice when he talked about those days, a glimpse of the man he used to be. But as the conversation continued, the weight of his current situation became harder to ignore. When Karoline gently asked how he ended up on the streets, James hesitated. For a long moment he stared at the cracked pavement beneath his boots. Then haltingly he began to share. He told her about coming back home after his second tour, only to find that civilian life wasn't what he expected. The transition was rough. He struggled with PTSD, couldn't hold down a job, and eventually lost touch with family members who didn't understand what he was going through. One bad decision led to another, and before he knew it, he was living out of a backpack and sleeping wherever he could find shelter. Listening to his story, Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat. She couldn't imagine carrying that kind of burden alone. Yet despite everything, James still carried himself with a quiet dignity. He wasn't asking for pity. He was just trying to survive. As they talked, Karoline realized something important. This wasn't just about giving someone money or food. It was about restoring hope. And she wanted to do more. When their conversation wound down, Karoline stood up and extended her hand. "James, it was really nice meeting you. Can we grab coffee sometime soon? I'd love to hear more about your story, and maybe figure out how I can help." James looked at her hand, then at her face, searching for any hint of insincerity. Finding none, he shook her hand firmly. "All right," he said, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "Coffee sounds good." As Karoline walked away, her mind raced with possibilities. This chance encounter might have been unplanned, but it felt like the start of something meaningful. Little did she know, her decision to reach out to James would set off a chain reaction that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Karoline woke up with James's story still fresh in her mind. She couldn't shake the image of him sitting on that cold sidewalk, his pride intact, but his spirit worn thin. As she sipped her coffee, staring out the window at the gray sky, she realized she had two choices. She could forget about their meeting and go about her day like everyone else, or she could do something real, to help. She chose the latter. Later that afternoon, Karoline returned to the same street corner where she'd met James. True to his word, he was there, huddled against the chilly breeze. When he saw her approach, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. "You actually came," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. "Of course I did," Karoline replied with a warm smile. She gestured toward the cafe across the street. "Ready for that coffee?" James hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He grabbed his backpack and followed her inside. The cafe was cozy, filled with the rich aroma of roasted beans and the soft hum of conversation. They found a quiet table by the window, and Karoline ordered 2 large coffees and a couple of sandwiches. As they sat down, James glanced around the room, clearly uneasy. It wasn't hard to guess why. He probably hadn't been in a place like this in months, maybe even years. Karoline noticed his discomfort but didn't say anything. Instead, she kept the mood light, chatting casually about random things until he relaxed a little. When the food arrived, James dug in almost immediately. Watching him eat, Karoline felt a pang of sadness. It was clear he hadn't had a proper meal in a while. After a few minutes, she leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but earnest. "James, I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday. About everything you've been through, and I want to help, not just with coffee or meals, but in a way that actually makes a difference." James paused mid-bite, his brow furrowing. "You don't have to do that," he muttered. "I'm used to taking care of myself." "I know," Karoline said quickly, "and I respect that. But sometimes it's okay to let people help. You served our country. You deserve better than this." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. James looked down at his hands, which were calloused and rough from years of hard living. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then finally, he sighed. "It's not that easy, you know. There's a lot of red tape. Programs that are supposed to help vets either don't work or are impossible to get into. And even when you do, it's never enough." Karoline listened, intently nodding as he spoke. She made mental notes, storing away every detail he shared. By the time they finished their coffee, she had a clearer picture of the challenges James and countless others like him faced daily. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt determined. If the system was broken, then maybe she could find a way to fix it, one step at a time. Over the next few days, Karoline threw herself into research. She spent hours online, scouring websites and forums for information about resources available to homeless veterans. What she discovered was both encouraging and frustrating. There were programs designed to assist veterans, ranging from housing initiatives to mental health counseling. However, accessing these services often required navigating a maze of paperwork, waiting lists, and bureaucratic hurdles. Many veterans simply gave up, unable to jump through all the hoops. Determined to make progress, Karoline decided to start small. She reached out to local organizations, explaining James's situation and asking for guidance. To her relief, several groups were willing to help. One nonprofit offered temporary housing options, while another provided free counseling sessions, tailored specifically for veterans dealing with PTSD. With these leads in hand, Karoline arranged another meeting with James. This time, they met at a park bench near the library. The sun was shining, casting golden light over the autumn leaves, scattered across the ground. James seemed more at ease than before, though he still carried an air of guarded skepticism. "All right," he said as soon as she sat down. "What's the plan?" Karoline grinned. "First, I found some places that might be able to help you get back on your feet. Temporary housing, counseling, job training, that kind of thing. But I need your permission to connect you with them." James frowned, suspicion creeping into his expression. "Why are you doing this? Most people wouldn't bother." "Because it's the right thing to do," Karoline answered simply. "And because I believe in second chances. You've already given so much to this country, it's time someone gave something back to you." Her sincerity must have struck a chord because after a long pause, James nodded. "Okay, let's try it." With his agreement, Karoline sprang into action. She accompanied James to meetings with caseworkers, helping him fill out forms and advocating on his behalf whenever necessary. At first he was hesitant to accept her involvement, insisting he didn't want to be a burden. But Karoline refused to take no for an answer. "You're not a burden," she told him firmly. "You're worth the effort." Slowly but surely, things began to fall into place. Within weeks, James secured a spot in a transitional housing program. It wasn't perfect. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but it was a roof over his head and a chance to rebuild. More importantly, it gave him stability, something he hadn't experienced in years. But Karoline wasn't done yet. As she watched James settle into his new routine, she started noticing patterns in the stories of other homeless veterans she encountered. Each one faced similar barriers: lack of accessible resources, stigma, and sheer exhaustion from fighting, a system that rarely worked in their favor. That's when an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that would grow into something far bigger than she ever imagined. For now, though, Karoline focused on celebrating the small victories. Every step forward for James felt like a triumph, proof that change was possible. And as she stood beside him during those early days of rebuilding, she couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose she'd never known before. This wasn't just about helping one person anymore. It was about creating a ripple effect, one life at a time. As James settled into his new apartment, the weight of uncertainty began to lift from his shoulders. For the first time in years, he had a place to call his own, even if it was temporary. The walls were bare, and the furniture consisted of little more than a bed, a table, and a chair. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that he finally had stability, a foundation on which to rebuild his life. Karoline visited him often during those early weeks. She brought groceries, helped him, set up utilities, and even arranged for a counselor to come by once a week. At first, James felt uncomfortable accepting so much help. He wasn't used to relying on anyone, let alone someone who seemed to care as deeply as Karoline did. But she had a way of making her presence feel less like charity and more like friendship. "We're in this together," she told him one evening as they unpacked bags of donated clothes. "You don't have to do it all alone." Despite her optimism, Karoline knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. James still struggled with the lingering effects of PTSD, sleepless nights, sudden mood swings, and moments when the world around him felt overwhelming. There were days when he questioned whether he'd ever truly recover. But through it all, Karoline remained steadfast, reminding him that healing wasn't linear. It was messy, unpredictable, and sometimes painfully slow, but it was worth it. One afternoon, while helping James organize his new space, Karoline noticed something tucked away in the corner of his backpack. It was a stack of old photographs, worn and faded but clearly cherished. Curious, she asked if she could take a look. James hesitated before nodding, watching silently as she flipped through the images. The photos told a story: young men and women in uniform, smiling under the desert sun. Candid shots of camaraderie during downtime. Group pictures with arms slung over each other's shoulders. In every image, James stood tall, his eyes bright with purpose. Karoline couldn't help but smile at the contrast between the man in the photos and the one sitting across from her now. "These are amazing," she said softly, holding up one particular photo. "Is this your unit?" James nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Yeah, those were good days. Hard, but we had each other's backs. You don't forget that kind of bond. Karoline studied the photo for a moment, longer before handing it back. Do you ever talk to them? Your old friends, I mean. James shook his head, his expression darkening. Not anymore. After everything that happened, I just sort of disappeared. They probably think I'm dead or something. His words struck a chord with Karoline. She realized how isolating his situation must have been. Not only physically homeless, but emotionally cut off from the people who once meant everything to him. On impulse, she leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. What if you reached out, even just one person? Sometimes reconnecting with the past can give you strength for the future. James looked at her skeptically. It's not that simple. Maybe not, Karoline admitted. But it's worth a shot, isn't it? Though he didn't say anything right away, Karoline could tell her suggestion had planted a seed. Over the next few days, she encouraged him to write a letter or send a message to someone from his unit. It didn't have to be long or complicated, just a way to open the door again. To her surprise, James agreed to try. While James worked on rebuilding connections from his past, Karoline found herself reflecting on the bigger picture. Helping him had opened her eyes to the staggering number of veterans struggling to reintegrate into civilian life. According to the statistics she'd read, tens of thousands of former service members faced homelessness each year, many battling mental health issues, unemployment, and fractured relationships. Yet despite the magnitude of the problem, there was little public awareness or coordinated effort to address it. Frustrated but determined, Karoline decided it was time to take action beyond James's individual case. She started small, posting about veteran homelessness on social media. Her posts included facts, personal reflections, and calls to action, urging her friends and followers to get involved. At first, the response was modest, a few likes here, a couple of shares there. But then something unexpected happened. One of Karoline's posts caught the attention of a local news reporter. Intrigued by her story, the reporter contacted her for an interview. Karoline was hesitant at first. She didn't want the focus to shift away from the real issue, but eventually agreed, hoping it would bring more attention to the cause. The segment aired on a Sunday evening, featuring clips of Karoline talking passionately about the challenges veterans face and how communities can step up to support them. She also shared James's story with his permission, highlighting the resilience and courage it took for him to start over. The impact was immediate. Within hours of the broadcast, Karoline's phone buzzed nonstop with messages from strangers, offering their support. Some wanted to volunteer their time, others pledged donations, and a handful of businesses reached out to offer resources like food, clothing, and job training programs. A local cafe owner even offered free meals to any veteran who walked in, no questions asked. Encouraged by the outpouring of goodwill, Karoline organized a community meeting to discuss ways they could collectively make a difference. Dozens of people showed up, neighbors, business owners, church groups, and even city officials. Together, they brainstormed ideas for initiatives aimed at supporting veterans, from hosting job fairs to creating mentorship programs. By the end of the night, a grassroots movement had begun to take shape. Through it all, James remained at the center of Karoline's efforts, not as a symbol of pity but as a testament to what was possible with compassion and determination. As he continued to heal and rebuild, he became increasingly involved in the projects Karoline spearheaded. He attended meetings, shared his experiences, and encouraged other veterans to seek help. His presence added authenticity to the movement, reminding everyone that behind every statistic was a human being with a story worth hearing. By the time winter rolled around, the changes in James were undeniable. He no longer carried the defeated slump in his shoulders or the distant look in his eyes. Instead, he moved with a renewed sense of purpose, driven by the belief that his struggles hadn't been in vain. And Karoline? She had found her calling, not just as a helper, but as a catalyst for change. Yet as gratifying as these developments were, Karoline knew they were only scratching the surface. The need was vast, and the work was far from over. But for the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, fueled by the knowledge that even the smallest actions could spark a wave of transformation. Winter settled over the town, bringing with it frosty mornings and shorter days. But inside James's small apartment, there was a warmth that hadn't been there before, not just from the heater humming softly in the corner, but from the sense of progress filling the air. Every day brought new milestones, a counselor who helped him unpack years of buried trauma, a job training program that reignited his confidence, and even a letter he'd written to an old friend from his unit, a tentative step toward reconnecting with the past. Karoline noticed the change in him almost immediately. The guarded look in his eyes softened, replaced by something brighter, more hopeful. He started smiling more often, cracking jokes during their visits, and even teasing Karoline about her relentless energy. "You're like a tornado," he said, one evening as they sorted through donations at a local shelter. "Just sweeping through everything and leaving good stuff behind." She laughed, tossing a pair of gloves into a box. "Well, someone has to keep things moving, right?" But beneath her cheerful demeanor, Karoline was wrestling with a decision, one that would alter the course of her life forever. Her corporate job, which she'd landed shortly after graduation, had always felt like a placeholder. It paid the bills, sure, but it didn't fulfill her. Helping James and working on community initiatives gave her purpose in a way her 9-to-5 never could. Still, quitting such a stable position wasn't something to take lightly. She spent hours weighing the pros and cons, lying awake at night wondering if she was being reckless. One chilly Saturday morning, as she sipped coffee at James's kitchen table, she finally voiced her thoughts. "What would you think," she began hesitantly, "if I quit my job to focus full-time on helping veterans like you?" James nearly dropped the mug he was holding. "Wait, seriously? You'd do that?" "Why not?" Karoline shrugged, though her heart raced. "This work, it's what I'm meant to be doing. I know it'll be hard, and I won't have the security anymore, but doesn't it feel like the right thing to do?" James studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. "Yeah, it does. But are you ready for that kind of commitment? People talk a big game about changing the world, but when it comes down to actually doing it, well, let's just say most folks bail pretty quick." His honesty caught her off guard, but she appreciated it. "I get that," she admitted. "And yeah, I'm scared. But isn't fear part of anything worth doing? Besides, look how far we've come already. If we can keep going, imagine what else is possible." James didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared out the window, watching snowflakes drift lazily to the ground. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "If you're serious about this, then count me in. Whatever crazy plan you come up with next, I'll help however I can." That conversation sealed the deal for Karoline. A week later, she handed in her resignation letter, shocking her coworkers and prompting endless questions from friends and family. "Are you sure about this?" her mom asked over the phone, concern lacing her tone. "What happens if it doesn't work out?" "I'll figure it out," Karoline replied confidently. "Even if it gets tough, at least I'll know I tried." With her newfound freedom, Karoline dove headfirst into expanding her efforts. She reached out to nonprofits across the country, learning from their successes and failures. She attended conferences, networked with advocates, and soaked up every piece of advice she could find. Slowly but surely, her vision began to crystallize. A grassroots organization dedicated to bridging the gaps in veteran support systems. She called it Second Mission, inspired by the idea that service shouldn't end when someone leaves the military. The name resonated deeply with James, who became one of the organization's earliest ambassadors. Together, they hosted workshops, organized donation drives, and partnered with local businesses to create sustainable solutions. One of their first major projects involved setting up a resource hub where veterans could access everything from housing assistance to mental health, counseling, all under one roof. It wasn't easy. Securing funding required countless grant applications and pitches to skeptical donors. But each time they hit a roadblock, James reminded her why they were doing this. "Remember," he told her one evening after a particularly grueling meeting, "we're not just building programs. We're giving people a second chance. That's bigger than any obstacle." Their persistence paid off. By spring, Second Mission had secured enough funding to open its first center in the heart of town. The grand opening drew a crowd: veterans, volunteers, city officials, and curious neighbors eager to see what all the buzz was about. As Karoline stood at the podium, addressing the audience, she felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. This wasn't just her dream anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in the power of community. Afterward, as people mingled and explored the facility, James pulled Karoline aside. "You did it," he said simply, pride shining in his eyes. "You actually did it." "We did it," she corrected, smiling. "None of this would have happened without you." As the weeks turned into months, Second Mission gained momentum. Word spread quickly, thanks in part to media coverage highlighting the organization's innovative approach. Donations poured in, allowing them to expand services and reach more veterans. What started as a small initiative sparked by a single act of kindness had grown into a movement touching lives far beyond their town. For James, the transformation was profound. With steady support and renewed connections to his old unit, he began thriving in ways he hadn't thought possible. He took on a part-time role mentoring other veterans at the center, sharing his story to inspire those still struggling. Then watching him stand tall and confident, Karoline couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd both come since that cold autumn morning. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. Critics argued that grassroots organizations like Second Mission couldn't solve systemic issues, pointing to the overwhelming scale of veteran homelessness nationwide. Others questioned whether relying on community-driven efforts was practical in the long run. Yet despite the skepticism, Karoline remained undeterred. For her, success wasn't measured in sweeping policy changes or massive numbers. It was in the individual victories. Every veteran housed, every PTSD survivor finding peace, every lonely soul rediscovering hope. That was proof enough that their work mattered. As summer approached, Karoline reflected on the whirlwind of the past year. She had sacrificed stability, comfort, and predictability to chase a dream that once seemed impossible. And while the road ahead promised more challenges, she knew she wouldn't trade this life for anything. Because in helping others heal, she had found healing for herself too. Unbeknownst to her, the best was yet to come. Across the country, people were taking notice, not just of Second Mission, but of the ripple effect it inspired. From small towns to big cities, communities began rallying around their own veterans, using Karoline's model as a blueprint. Little did she know, her decision to stop and talk to a stranger on a street corner would ignite a nationwide movement, one that proved compassion, determination, and human connection could truly change the world. As summer rolled in, the momentum behind Second Mission continued to grow. The organization's resource center had become a hub of activity, buzzing with volunteers, veterans, and community members eager to lend a hand. Every day brought new faces, some seeking help, others offering it. Karoline spent her days coordinating programs, meeting with donors, and ensuring everything ran smoothly. It was exhausting work, but she thrived on the energy of the people around her. James, meanwhile, had found his footing in ways no one could have predicted. His role as a mentor at the center gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He connected easily with other veterans, sharing not just his struggles, but also the lessons he'd learned along the way. "You don't have to figure it all out at once," he often told them during group sessions. "Just take it one step at a time, that's what I did." His words carried weight because they came from experience. Veterans listened intently, nodding as he spoke about the importance of reaching out for help, staying patient through setbacks, and leaning on the support of those who cared. Over time, James became more than just a participant in Second Mission. He was its heart and soul. His presence reminded everyone that recovery wasn't linear. It was messy, imperfect, and deeply personal. One afternoon, as Karoline sat in her tiny office catching up on emails, a knock interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see James standing in the doorway holding a stack of papers. "Got a minute?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an answer. "Always," she replied, gesturing for him to sit. "What's up?" James placed the papers on her desk, a collection of letters and photographs. They were responses from old friends in his unit, many of whom had written back after receiving his initial letter months earlier. Some expressed disbelief that he was alive, while others shared updates about their own lives. One even included a photo of their old platoon gathered for a reunion last year. "I didn't think anyone would write back," James admitted, running a hand over his face. "But they did. And now we're talking again. Like nothing ever changed." Karoline smiled, genuinely happy for him. "That's incredible. How does it feel?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "It feels like I'm finally coming home. Not just to a place, but to myself. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," she said softly. "And you deserve every bit of it." The conversation lingered in Karoline's mind long after James left. It reinforced something she'd always believed, that healing wasn't just about addressing physical needs like housing or food. It was about restoring connections, rebuilding identities, and reminding people of their worth. As much as second, mission focused on practical solutions, its true strength lay in fostering relationships and creating spaces where veterans felt seen and valued. Word of the organization's success spread far beyond the town. Local newspapers covered their initiatives, highlighting stories of veterans who had turned their lives around with the help of Second Mission. Social media played a huge role too, amplifying their message and drawing attention from across the country. People began reaching out, not just to donate or volunteer, but to share their own experiences. Many wrote heartfelt messages thanking Karoline and her team for shining a light on an issue that had long been ignored. One such message came from a woman whose brother had served in Afghanistan. She described how he returned home struggling with PTSD and eventually ended up living in his car. Despite her efforts to help, she felt powerless against the system. When she stumbled upon an article about Second Mission, she reached out, hoping to learn more. Karoline responded personally, offering guidance and connecting her with resources in her area. The exchange sparked a friendship that blossomed into collaboration, with the woman becoming one of the organization's most passionate advocates. As interest grew, so did opportunities. A national nonprofit specializing in veteran affairs invited Karoline to speak at their annual conference. Nervous but excited, she accepted, knowing this was a chance to amplify Second Mission's mission on a larger stage. The event took place in a bustling convention center, packed with activists, policymakers, and veterans themselves. Standing at the podium, Karoline felt a surge of emotion as she looked out at the sea of faces. "When I started this journey," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves, "I didn't set out to change the world. I just wanted to help one person. But what I've learned is that helping one person can create ripples that touch thousands. Every veteran deserves dignity, respect, and the opportunity to thrive. And if we come together, as neighbors, as communities, as human beings, we can make that happen." Her speech earned a standing ovation, leaving many in tears. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached her, eager to learn how they could replicate Second Mission's model in their own towns. For hours, she fielded questions, exchanged contact information, and shared ideas. By the end of the day, her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from people inspired to take action. Back home, the impact of the conference rippled through the community. Donations surged, allowing Second Mission to expand its services. They launched a job placement program, partnering with local businesses to provide training and employment opportunities tailored to veterans' skills. A mental health initiative offered free counseling sessions, led by therapists specially trained to address trauma. Even the resource center underwent renovations, transforming into a welcoming space complete with a library, computer lab, and recreational area. Through it all, James remained a constant source of support. He accompanied Karoline to meetings, spoke at events, and helped onboard new participants. Together they traveled to neighboring towns, spreading awareness and inspiring others to join the movement. Their bond deepened with each passing day, rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. To outsiders, they seemed like an unlikely pair, young and idealistic, older and battle-tested. But their differences only strengthened their partnership. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Securing sustainable funding remained a constant struggle, requiring endless fundraising campaigns and grant applications. Critics still questioned whether grassroots organizations like Second Mission could truly tackle systemic issues. Yet Karoline and James refused to let doubt derail their efforts. Instead, they focused on what mattered most, the lives they were changing, one at a time. Late one evening, as they sat on the steps of the resource center watching the sunset, James broke the comfortable silence. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I first met you, I didn't think much of it. Just another person passing by. But now," he trailed off, shaking his head with a small laugh. "Now I don't even know where to start." Karoline grinned. "How about thank you?" he chuckled, nudging her playfully. "Yeah, thanks for being stubborn enough to stick around. You saved my life, you know." She shook her head, her smile softening. "No, James, you saved yourself. All I did was give you a push. The rest was all you." They sat there for a while longer, letting the moment sink in. Neither of them knew exactly what the future held, but one thing was certain. They had already accomplished more than either of them ever imagined. And as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, it felt like the beginning of something extraordinary, a testament to the power of kindness, determination, and the unshakable belief that even the smallest actions can spark monumental change. As autumn returned, painting the town in hues of gold and crimson, Second Mission entered a new chapter. The organization had grown beyond anything Karoline or James could have envisioned when they first started. What began as a small effort to help one veteran had transformed into a nationwide movement, inspiring communities across the country to take action. But with growth came challenges, bigger responsibilities, higher expectations, and the pressure to keep up with demand. Karoline often found herself working late into the night, surrounded by piles of paperwork and glowing computer screens. Her days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and site visits. Despite the exhaustion, she thrived on the energy of the people around her. Every success story fueled her determination to do more. Yet there were moments when doubt crept in. Was she doing enough? Could they sustain this momentum? These questions haunted her, but she pushed them aside, focusing instead on the work at hand. James, too, faced his own struggles. While he had come a long way from the man sitting on that cold street corner, healing wasn't something that happened overnight. Some nights, memories of war still woke him in a sweat, leaving him restless and anxious. But now, he had tools to cope. Therapy sessions, breathing exercises, and a support system that understood what he was going through. More importantly, he had purpose. Helping others gave him a reason to keep moving forward, even on the hardest days. One crisp October morning, Karoline received an email that would change everything. A major national foundation dedicated to supporting veterans had taken notice of Second Mission's impact. They wanted to partner with the organization, offering not just financial backing but also access to resources and networks that could amplify their reach. It was the kind of opportunity most grassroots movements dreamed of, but it came with strings attached. The foundation expected accountability, scalability, and measurable outcomes. For Karoline, it meant stepping up in ways she hadn't anticipated. She called James immediately. "We need to talk," she said over the phone, her voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension. "Sounds serious," James replied, chuckling. "What's going on?" When they met later that afternoon at the resource center, Karoline explained the situation. As she spoke, James listened intently, his expression shifting between surprise and concern. "This is huge," he said finally. "But are we ready for something like this? It's a lot of pressure." "I know," Karoline admitted. "And Honestly, part of me wonders if we're biting off more than we can chew. But think about it. If we say no, we might miss out on helping thousands of veterans who need us. How can we turn that down? James nodded slowly, understanding where she was coming from. All right, let's do it. But we'll need all hands on deck. We can't handle this alone. With James's encouragement, Karoline dove headfirst into preparing for the partnership. She assembled a team of trusted volunteers, many of whom had been with Second Mission since its early days. Together, they worked tirelessly to streamline operations, improve record-keeping, and develop strategies for scaling their programs. It was grueling work, but the sense of camaraderie kept everyone motivated. Everyone knew they were building something bigger than themselves. The collaboration with the Foundation launched in December, coinciding with the holiday season. To celebrate, Second Mission hosted a massive community event at the local park. There were food trucks, live music, and activities for kids, along with booths showcasing the organization's various initiatives. Veterans shared their stories on stage, while local leaders praised the work being done. The highlight of the evening came when James stood before the crowd, microphone in hand, to deliver a heartfelt speech. "I never thought I'd be standing here today," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves. "A few years ago, I didn't have much hope left. But then someone stopped to listen, to really see me, and reminded me that I mattered. That changed everything. Now, because of her and so many others, I get to pay it forward. If you're out there struggling, please know you're not alone. There are people who care, who want to help. All you have to do is ask." His words brought tears to countless eyes, including Karoline's. As the audience erupted into applause, she felt a swell of pride, not just for James, but for everyone who had contributed to making Second Mission what it was today. This wasn't just her victory. It belonged to the entire community. In the weeks that followed, the effects of the partnership became undeniable. With increased funding, Second Mission expanded its services, opening new centers in neighboring towns. Job training programs flourished, placing dozens of veterans in meaningful employment. Counseling sessions reached capacity, with wait lists shrinking thanks to additional staff. Even the resource hub transformed, adding amenities like a fitness area and art therapy classes designed to promote wellness. Yet amidst all the progress, Karoline made sure to stay grounded. She continued visiting each center regularly, checking in with participants and listening to their feedback. She believed strongly that no matter how big Second Mission grew, it should always feel personal, like a family rather than an institution. 1. Snowy evening. As she sat in her car after leaving the original resource center, Karoline reflected on how far they'd come. From that chance encounter on a chilly street corner to becoming a beacon of hope for veterans nationwide, the journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. But what struck her most was the resilience of the human spirit. Whether it was James, reclaiming his life, or a young veteran finding confidence through a job placement program, every story reinforced her belief in the power of connection. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from James. Heading. "Home, stop stressing, you've earned a break." She smiled, typing back, "Thanks, see you tomorrow." As she drove home under the starlit sky, Karoline realized something profound. Success wasn't about accolades or numbers, it was about the lives touched along the way. And though the road ahead promised more challenges, she knew they were ready to face them together. Because in the end, it wasn't about changing the world overnight. It was about showing up, day after day, and proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could create waves of transformation. Little did she know the best chapters of their story were yet to unfold. Across the nation, communities inspired by Second Mission were rising to the occasion, proving that compassion and determination could truly rewrite futures. And at the heart of it all stood two unlikely heroes, a young woman with a dream and a veteran who dared to believe again. Years passed, and the ripple effect of Second Mission continued to spread far beyond what anyone could have imagined. What had started as a simple act of kindness on a chilly autumn morning had grown into a nationwide movement that touched thousands of lives. Veterans who once felt invisible found themselves embraced by communities eager to help. Families torn apart by hardship began to heal, and at the heart of it all stood Karoline and James, two individuals whose paths crossed by chance, but whose partnership became a beacon of hope. The organization's impact wasn't just measured in numbers, though there were plenty of those. Hundreds of veterans had been housed, thousands had received counseling or job training, and countless others had benefited from the resources Second Mission provided. But the real measure of success was in the stories, the quiet victories that didn't make headlines but meant everything to those involved. One such story came from a small town in the Midwest, where a group of neighbors banded together after hearing about Second Mission. Inspired by its grassroots approach, they created their own support network for local veterans. They held fundraisers, organized volunteer days, and even turned an abandoned building into a community center. When Karoline visited during one of her travels, she was overwhelmed by the warmth and determination she saw. "We wouldn't have known where to start without you," one of the organizers told her, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you for showing us what's possible." Moments like these reminded Karoline why she had chosen this path. It wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about creating spaces where people could find hope and belonging. And while she often joked that she was just a girl with big ideas, everyone around her knew better. Her relentless optimism and unwavering belief in humanity inspired others to step up and do their part. For James, the journey had been transformative in ways he never anticipated. The man who once doubted whether he deserved a second chance now stood tall, mentoring others and advocating for change. He traveled alongside Karoline, sharing his story at conferences, schools, and community events. His words carried weight because they came from experience. He understood the struggles veterans faced because he had lived them. Yet, instead of dwelling on pain, he focused on resilience. "Life doesn't give you easy roads," he often said, "but every road has a purpose if you're willing to walk it." Their bond deepened over time, evolving into something neither of them could have predicted. They weren't just colleagues or friends, they were family. James liked to tease Karoline about her stubborn streak, while she affectionately called him the voice of reason. Together they balanced each other out, pushing forward even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Despite their successes, challenges remained. Funding fluctuations, bureaucratic hurdles, and the sheer scale of need kept them on their toes. There were moments of frustration, times when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. But through it all, they leaned on the lessons they'd learned early on. Progress takes patience, setbacks are temporary, and no one has to go it alone. One evening, years after their journey began, Karoline and James found themselves sitting on the steps of the original resource center. The building had undergone renovation since its humble beginnings, but it still held the same spirit, a place where lives were rebuilt and dreams reignited. As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Karoline broke the comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked, her voice soft. James tilted his head, considering the question. "All the time," he admitted. "If I hadn't met you that day, well, I don't know where I'd be. Probably still out there thinking nobody cared." Karoline shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "I think someone else would have stopped eventually. You're too important to ignore." He chuckled, nudging her playfully. "You're too kind for your own good, you know that?" They shared a laugh, the sound echoing softly in the cool evening air. For a moment, neither spoke, content to simply sit together and reflect. The road ahead was uncertain, as it always had been, but they faced it with confidence. They had built something extraordinary, not just an organization, but a community rooted in compassion and resilience. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, James stood up, stretching his arms. "Well," he said with a grin, "ready to keep changing the world?" Karoline smiled, rising to join him. "Always." Together, they walked back inside, ready to tackle whatever came next. Their story was far from over, but one thing was certain. They had proven that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change. By choosing to see humanity in others and acting on it, they had rewritten futures, including their own. And so the legacy of Second Mission lived on, carried forward by the countless lives it touched. From bustling cities to quiet towns, people continued to rise up, inspired by the belief that kindness, determination, and human connection could truly transform the world, one life at a time.